Welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to be discussing a topic called emotional intelligence. You might be familiar with it already, and we'll dive deep into it as we continue to expand our leadership toolkit. So, we'll talk about the concepts and aspects of emotional intelligence, we'll discuss why it's relevant for a leader, and then you will reflect on it through a self-awareness test to understand how you can leverage it. So my first question for you is, you might be familiar with IQ, but are you familiar with EQ? Take some time to discuss with your group on how these are similar or different and come back. Now, let's talk about EQ, emotional intelligence or the emotional quotient. What does this mean? It's the capacity that you have to understand the emotional aspects of your interaction with yourself and others. Why does this matter? Where does it come from? This comes from Daniel Goleman's 1998 paper, which carried out a study over 188 large global companies. And what they found was that IQ and technical skills were what known as threshold qualities. So basically, they were the ones that defined whether you got the job or not. But what they found about emotional intelligence, and what we'll discuss in more detail later on, is that this was twice as important as IQ and technical skills for those who were considered excellent performers in their positions. Further, the higher up in a company or organization that you go, the more relevant that emotional intelligence becomes. The good thing here, though, is that emotional intelligence is something that can be learned or improved through motivation, extended practice, and feedback. Let me ask you something. Does emotional intelligence matter outside of the business world? If so, how? Discuss amongst yourself and come back. Well, I'm sure you've found that emotional intelligence is something that is valuable also in your family life, in your personal life. So it's something that is not just relevant for us to get our job done, but it's also something relevant for us to live a better life. As such, let's go right in and hear from the man himself, Daniel Goleman, in this short video where he introduces what emotional intelligence is. When you watch this video, I want you to be paying attention to what he describes are the components of emotional intelligence, or EQ. Watch the video, and when you're done, come back. So, Daniel described 4 emotional intelligence components, but there's a 5th one in his article of what makes a leader. Here, you'll see the 5 components. This article, you'll hopefully have already read it, or will read it soon, as provided to you by your lecturer, in which these 5 aspects or key dimensions of emotional intelligence are discussed in depth. As an overview, though, I'll share with you this slide, which you can come back to when we move into the exercise further on. So, the 5 components are self-awareness, how well you're able to understand and recognize your own moods, emotions, and what drives you. Self-regulation, how well you're capable of controlling or managing your different emotions and moods, and how well you're able to suspend quick judgment before making a decision. Motivation, which is how passionate you are to your works and how you pursue your goals with energy and perseverance. Empathy, which is how well you relate to others and understand their situations. And social skills, which is how well you can maintain relationships and build together common ground. Now, these should be reminiscent of what we covered in leader and leadership development, because they're the same ones that Daniel Day had identified. So you see that there's an overlap in becoming an emotional intelligent leader and developing your leadership both intrapersonally and interpersonally. What I want you to do now is to divide into 5 groups, where each one of your groups will take one of these components. And you'll describe how or when this component occurs, matters, or does not occur and does not matter in your work environment. And then a little note on why this is relevant for you as a leader. Summarize these and present it to your classmates. When you're done, come back. So, you looked at these emotional intelligence components, you've discussed them, and you've started to get a grip on them. But fair warning, emotional intelligence has had its criticisms, and that's what we'll look at now. This is by researcher Barrett, which mentions two main critiques to emotional intelligence. The first one is the capacity to read other people's emotions. What has been shown is that unless you know a person very well, it's hard to get very granular or very detailed into what emotions they're actually feeling. Are they being quiet because they're sad, they're angry, they're hungry, or they're lost? Are they smiling out of genuine joy? Or is it something a bit more mischievous, something a bit of a prankster would do, right? It takes time to develop our ability to read emotions in other people. So this is one of the critiques of how quickly emotional intelligence can be applied. And the other one is rational control over your emotions, which the easiest ways to explain it is, I'm sure sometimes you felt mad, sad, angry, or one of these, what are usually conceived by us as negative emotions, and you've thought, I need to stop doing this. Have you been able to? A lot of the time, if not most of it, it's very difficult to have rational control over your emotions. So based on this, how does Barrett encourage us to take emotional intelligence further? To do this, she posits that in neuroscience, what they have found is that the brain, the way it works, is sort of like a fortune-telling machine. It creates all of its thoughts, emotions, and perceptions automatically and on the fly. It's not preconceived, but it draws from previous experiences. So if I've always had trouble at a supermarket, when I look at it, immediately I'm going to have that thought come into my mind because my brain is creating this from past experiences. How does this help us with emotional intelligence? It helps us particularly for the capacity of reading other people's emotions, with what she calls emotional granularity, or the capacity to distinguish between different emotions. What is the difference between happiness and joy and blissfulness? What is the difference between hatred, resentment, and anger? By being able to fine-tune these, you'll be able to more readily understand and read them in others. As she says, when you learn new words, you sculpt your brain's microwiring, which gives it the means to construct new emotional experiences. That is, we need the words to be able to identify them to the different emotions, right? You'll see this, as in the example that I will show now, on words around the world. Furgan is Hebrew, and it's an emotion that is the simple and unselfish joy that something good has happened to someone else. Schadenfreude, which is the feeling of pleasure derived by seeing another's misfortune, is a German emotion for which they found a word. Kilig is Tagalog from the Philippines of the giddiness you feel when you meet your crush, someone you like. So they have a specific word for that feeling. Gezelligheid is a Dutch word, and it refers to the warmth of being with loved ones. Again, that feeling, that warmth of being with someone you love, has a specific word in Dutch. Are there any examples in your country or in your culture? Take some time to share. So, you might have shared a few examples, but now we're going to do some practical work on expanding our emotional vocabulary. And so, go back to the water. What are we going to do? Your lecturer is going to give you a periodic chart of human emotions. It defines a lot more words related to emotions that probably what you're used to. Your job in your groups is to pick one of those emotions, and you will act them out either individually or with your whole group or as pairs, and the other groups will try and guess which emotion from the periodic table are you actually performing. At the end, the group with the most points will win. So, get a hold of your periodic table of human emotions, take a look at it, and begin. When you're done, come back and we'll continue. So, how did it go? I'm not sure what words you picked, but I'm almost certain that most, if not all of you, felt very uncomfortable walking into this space and performing in front of others emotions so openly. This is part of leadership development as well. It is being able to take the leap, as our duckling has done, and feel uncomfortable, and feel in unknown waters, and explore. Hopefully, you learn from it as well. Now, what you will do is learn further on a personal level. You will receive a questionnaire, self-assessment, that helps you judge your emotional intelligence. Now, there are many emotional intelligence tests, and this one focuses on emotional intelligence applied to 5 aspects. Your emotional intelligence for understanding words, for understanding concepts, for your surroundings, for yourself, and for your relationship with others. Take time to fill up this questionnaire and then identify one of your strengths and one of your areas for improvements. And then write how you will use these to improve on your leadership. This all again aligns with your individual leadership development plan. Take your time to fill this and then we'll wrap up. So, what would I like to finish with this time? As Goldman says, if you are tuned out of your own emotions, you will be poor at reading them in other people. Self-awareness and reflection again come back in our leadership development. This is why that self-awareness test is very key for you. Now, does EQ, now that you've looked at it, emotional intelligence, matter for leadership? I hope the answer is obvious, but dig in a little bit on why or why not with your colleagues, and then come back. These were the key takeaway points for today's lecture. Feel free to look at them or review the video on any points that you have questions. Thank you again for going through this lecture with me. I look forward to joining you again in the following one.